Welcome, y'all. Thank you for joining our webinar today. This is part one of a two-part series, our broadband webinar series. This is co-hosted between Texas Rural Funders and the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And this is an extension of our 2026 Broadband Summit earlier this February. And so we gathered folks together in Dallas in person for a few days to think through what it would take to move our broadband projects across Texas from plan to implementation, really looking at some of the key components that different regions of the state are puzzling through right now. Finance models, how to build a regional coalition, workforce needs and challenges and how to meet them. And we weren't able to reach every topic during February's Broadband Summit. If you want to catch up on the recordings, review the materials, I've just dropped a link in the chat to where those are stored on our website. But this two-part webinar series is really looking at topics that we weren't able to get to during the summit, but that we know from registration, from connecting with broadband advocates in the field like yourselves, that y'all have an interest in learning more about. Today's webinar with Connect Humanity is all about RFPs. If we are thinking through how to identify the right partner to help us build out in our corner of Texas, what are we looking for? What should we consider? We have a second webinar coming up on May 18th. I am dropping that link in the chat right now for part two of this webinar series, which brings together our friends from the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society to talk us through how we put together and manage regional coalitions for broadband. You can register for that now. But without further ado, I am happy to introduce our friends at Connect Humanity. We have with us Brian Vo, the Chief Investment Officer, Brian Snyder, the Broadband Implementation Advisor. And if you're not familiar with Connect Humanity, this is a national organization, national partner, leading expert on broadband that's been working to help expand access to this technology, this critical infrastructure across the US, but especially here in Texas. They're an emerging community development financial institution and an expert on the topic that we're about to tackle for today. So if you haven't already, make sure that you are muted. This webinar is being recorded. We will share this recording with everyone who is registered, as well as the slide deck. But without further ado, I'd like to hand this off to Brian and Brian.
Thank you, Evan. Thanks for the intro and really appreciate everybody carving out time. We have 90 minutes together. So at any point, if you have questions or anything, please do put it in the chat and we can try to address things as we go, and definitely want to leave some time for Q&A. What we wanted to get started with first was you are spending 90 minutes with us, or at least that's how long the session goes. We really wanted to lead off with a question of what did you hope to get out of today? Knowing that 90 minutes, while longer than the usual call, isn't quite all the time we would need to get into every nook and cranny of broadband RFPs. So if you could either use your phone or a device to scan the QR code or go to this website, slido.com, with this code, would love to hear some responses. Is it not working? Or do we really have zero responses? That's helpful. Thank you, Angela. That's always the default technology. Just put it in the group chat. It's something's come through. Lessons learned. All right. Maybe while we have that going, Brian and I can introduce ourselves. uh, 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 as responses roll in. So Brian Vo within Connect Community, I lead the transaction effort, the investment effort. So really asking and trying to answer the question, how do we structure financing in a different way to help get broadband to communities that have been left behind by traditional markets, including traditional capital markets? My background is more on the finance side, so spent some time in investment banking, infrastructure, private equity, and strategy consulting before spending the last decade plus in impact investing and thinking about how we can get capital to really achieve social outcomes and financial returns. Snyder?
Yeah, so I'm the other Brian, Brian Snyder. I'm the implementation manager and advisor for Connect Humanity, um, basically helping in with multiple markets that Connect Humanity works in, directly with the municipalities, trying to build a plan that can be implemented, and it's not just something that can be stored away. And I guess my philosophy, it's always feasible. So we try to think of outside the box ways to move forward. My background, I've worked with on the contracting side, doing large volume deployments with AT&T, Google Fiber, Verizon. I started my own ISP called Lit Communities back in 2019, where we focused on public-private partnerships. And I've been on all sides of the RFPs, from helping write them to responding to them. So hopefully a lot of these questions that are coming up as we're talking are great, and we'll be able to answer these throughout the presentation.
And this is a pretty good spread. So lessons learned from RFPs, good components to a good RFP, finding right opportunities, partners. How do we pick between high quality responses? There is also then a big spread. How do libraries get involved? The audit element of it. So I think we'll be able to hit on some, but not all of these things. Um, uh, Here's here are the materials that we have prepared. To the extent that there are questions that come up along the way, we can try to answer those as well. Hopefully it's somewhere in the ballpark of these themes. We first wanted to start with what are the prerequisites to an RFP, RFQ. I think one of the questions we often get is like, can you give us an RFP template that we can plug and play? But the RFP in many instances, or at certain stages, really, we see it as the finish line of the beginning. It's the end of the beginning. But there's a lot of work that happens to inform quality RFPs. We'll definitely touch on best practices and landmines. And Connect Humanity certainly is a nonprofit impact investor. Community interest very much is our North Star. So whether that is the financing structure, the legal structure, or other. We often think about how do we structure the partnerships in a way where community interest is protected, if not elevated. And then we'll go through some specific examples and some resources that you can click into once the slides are circulated. So the journey before the RFP, here are the few questions we usually ask when folks ask about the RFP process or the RFP document. There really is a body of work that happens beforehand. So the first question really is, what is in scope for the build? And that's going to be critical for respondents just to know like what is exactly the network they're trying to design around and cost. How do we want to participate in the build? Oftentimes folks are surprised by this because if you can on one end of the spectrum outsource it all, right? And say here's the geography, this is what's in scope for the RFP. Please somebody respond to this part of it. What we've seen in not just successful RFPs, but also successful implementation are communities that are very clear in what parts of the design, the construction, and the operations do they want to get involved with. And often that means some level of transparency and reporting to maintain that engagement. So how would you want to be? How would you want to participate? What am I willing or able to finance? One of the things that we say very often is capital is power. And so the more capital or in kind that a community can bring to the table, the more power, the more leverage they have in that conversation, in that negotiation. Which parts of the community will be served, what types of technologies will be used, what types of products and pricing will there be. And then, of course, can we issue an RFP? Um, uh, so digging into the first one, I'll just give the high level, and Snyder, if you wanted to jump in with any specifics. The balance that we usually see is, are you trying to cover a large area to try to get scale economies in the cost of deploying per household? Or on the other end of the spectrum, are you trying to just get something started with the hope that that pilot project or that pilot connectivity in that certain area then begins a snowball effect, right? And now you have your network core that then can proliferate a little bit easier. And so each of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. One is going to be faster, cheaper, but it's not going to be all the households you would have wanted to connect. On the other end of the spectrum, on the scale side, it will be cheaper on a per unit basis, but it's going to be more complex and certainly more costlier. There is no right or wrong here. It's really going to depend on the community, the history there, and some of the stakeholders around it. Brian, I don't know if there's some of your experiences that you'd want to talk to.
Yeah, and we get into this a little bit on a couple of the other slides, but obviously before going into this type of process, and every community is individual in their own aspect, but obviously individual in how they're handling broadband. And what's the right answer for one city might not be the same for the other one. So knowing what you want to accomplish going into it is really important. I've seen RFPs that were written that were never even planned to go forward for certain reasons. We've seen ones that were written for specific pilot projects because the full buy-in wasn't there from the community. And so we structured it to where we can do more of a proof of concept and then go from there. Other communities, they've been further along. They've already done kind of an assessment and built that scope of work to where it is a bigger scale. But a lot of that has to do with funding and where they're at overall as a community, and what they've done to get to that point. But fully understanding how you want to participate as a community, how you even need to put yourself in the shoes of the respondents and how the ISPs are going to respond. Coming from starting my own ISP and working those, having more information in what's going to be useful for the response in regards to what the future project's going to be. Uh, you can immediately tell when something, a template's almost copied and pasted from another consultant. We've gone through that experience a lot. And just taking that and responding to it might not be specific to what that community really needs. And then you're in a tough spot of selecting who the right ISP is from that. But from the ISP side, you're going to get better responses by really honing in on exactly what you're asking for. And some of you on this call, I think even in questions, are in earlier stages where might be, I don't know what we're asking for. And that's the first part, even before this RFP, is really digging in and figuring out what you want. Whether it be just, it could be as simple as I need fiber internet in one certain area compared to another area, and writing a specific scope around that's going to be really important. But These next slides, Brian, you can start, I think, on the next ones, kind of start getting into this.
So this is a simple framing of where different ways a community could participate in the design, build, and operations of the network. And so on one end of the spectrum, I think most of the communities we've talked to start on the right-hand side, or at least default there, not knowing that there are other potential options. And so is it going to be privately owned and operated with a single operator? Right? In which case, post RFP, post award, you're mostly going to be a spectator, and the engagement often reflects that, right? Where the private operator really is in the sole driver's seat. On the other end of the spectrum, we see a lot of networks that are community owned in some way. And the example that we usually like to give there is if in community ownership, however you want to define community, whether it's muni or nonprofit, local trust, local foundation, co-op, that's where that owner is then the landlord. The hybrid model is somewhere in between where you can mix and match different parts of the ownership. Now, each of those are going to have, again, advantages and disadvantages, right? The more to the left that you go, as a landlord, you have more control over things, and you'd be able to require certain things more so. But there's also a cost to that, right? And so that usually is where then the community or that owner would be responsible for funding most of it or financing it somehow. On the other end, the appeal of having it fully privately owned, having it fully outsourced is somebody else is often, not always, often then responsible for most, if not all, of the financing for it, or at least trying to figure out where the funding is coming from. So within this space, one of the things we want to say, there is no right or wrong on this spectrum. It's really going to be a question of what is the level of participation that your community, you want to have in this, and what are the really pragmatically, like what levers of power, levers of capital do you want and or have to be able to figure out where on this you want to fall. Regardless of where you fall, what we do advocate for is that this be an intentional decision rather than defaulting to one or the other. Do you have anything to add, Brian?
No, I think that was good. I actually do want to answer, though, one of the questions I think Mr. Davis asked about what can public libraries do to help people obtain broadband in our area. And we're going to talk about some of these items later, but I wanted to go ahead and answer that while it's in the chat. Like, especially libraries, we've set up in certain markets where we called them experience centers, but it's also great to have your digital education courses there as well too, and you can provide that to as like an in-kind contribution to the ISP that's providing service there. There's a lot of ways that just not only libraries but community anchor institutes in general can really support what's going on. But this goes back to what we were saying, kind of having an understanding of what all you can offer going into the request for proposals is really important in that aspect because you don't necessarily have to provide financing. Some of these in-kind contributions are huge. And just specifically for libraries, it's a great place to do some digital education learning to where then residents and business owners are going to be able to use the internet tools a lot better going forward from that side. So sorry, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit, Brian, but
Oh, no, not at all. So scratching a little bit deeper, we talked a little bit about the top axis of like on one hand, is it fully Outsourced, that's where you're relying on privately owned, privately operated. And then the other one is community owned. That would be the fully in-sourced version of it. We wrote municipality there. It could be any number of organizations. We've worked with some communities who are like, incumbents not coming over to the side of town. We're going to create a community foundation with governance that mimics a broadband co-op. And they then built their own fiber network that the foundation owned. And its charter said that the assets cannot be dispossessed. It has to have an affordability first type of rule. That ownership allows you to do a lot of that. Now, there's a difference. What we found was when we talked to some communities and said, "Hey, have you thought about this intentionally?" There is this ownership option of it. There was a what's the word? It was like I'm losing the word, but is inflation? I think this thought that ownership meant that they had to operate it at the same time. What this slide is trying to communicate is ownership can be very different, can be distinct from operating it, and so sometimes those two roles are combined. Oftentimes, particularly if it's outsourced, but they don't need to be. So you could be going back to our landlord example. You could be the owner where you are the landlord, but then you are renting the network out to a tenant who will then provide service on top of that. And I won't dig through the advantages, disadvantages too much. Folks can read that afterwards. This is a little bit of what Brian was talking about earlier, which is when you do think intentionally about your participation in it, it goes beyond, do you want to own or not, or how much do you want to contribute from a capital perspective? But there are other things that a community, particularly a muni, would be able to contribute that will make the RFP more versus less attractive, the deployment easier versus harder. Brian, did you want to talk through a couple of those examples?
I think it's actually on the next slide. I'll be talking through those. So I think,
Okay.
yeah, I'll be giving examples for sure. And everybody will get documentation on this as well too. So that way you can go back and read some of this information too. And it's not like you're drinking out of a fire hose right now.
So in terms of skin in the game, right? Like often folks will think it's only capital that they might be able to contribute. If they don't have anything, then they don't have anything to contribute. Very much not true. And so on the in-kind side of it, we've seen things like faster permitting processes. Marketing has been a huge one where in some communities the muni committed to having putting in flyers in their water bills advertising the new internet service. And so we've seen communities use a lot of these resources and assets that they do have. All of that can contribute to better economics for the provider and therefore just more attractive RFP. At the same time, the more that a community contributes, the more that they participate, whether it's capital contributions or in-kind contributions. The flip side of that is you can then also ask for community protections. So a lot of the things we'll advocate for is ensuring that certain service areas are served, not phase 3 or at some later date, but really committing to a fixed timeline. Affordability. What is that price though? And is it just advertised speeds? Is it actual speeds? Is it upload download? Is it latency? Is there an always on option? What about data throttling, data caps? So all of that really can get spelled out and often captured in something like a community benefits agreement. As a lender, one of the things we'll often do is we bake it into our loan agreement. to say that these things must happen as a condition of the loan. And if you deviate from those things, then we will hold you in default of the loan as seriously as if you missed a debt service payment. We're able to do that because we have that capital and puts us in the position to ask for it or require it. Financing. We don't have to spend too much time on this. I just wanted to give a quick spread of the different types of capital options that we've seen. I would say from the capital market side, not from a grant or public perspective. So on the private lender side of things, these are generally some of the interest rates that we've seen and also the sizes. One of the things that Connect Humanity is really trying to do is we've seen a lot of pockets of need that are much smaller than this. So your 5 mil, 10 mil, 15 mil. So we're trying to get the credit markets, in particular lenders, community finance institutions, to be able to start lending to that scale. But you can see the range of returns here or interest rates. And as for comparison, we also put in what private equity usually targets. And so, there's one example of a loan that we did for a community where it was a P3 with federal state money. The internet provider was putting some money in, and then the Economic Development Authority was responsible for some hook, was on the hook for some of it. Our borrower was the Economic Development Authority. And when the EDA, when I asked for the financial model from the EDA, they got it from the internet provider. When I got that, one of my habits is, as a former banker, is always looking for hidden tabs. In this financial model, there was a hidden tab called IRR, or internal rate of return. It was basically the amount of money that the provider expected to make. And in it was a 33% internal rate of return, which basically means they're going to double their money in about 2 years, just to put things into order of magnitude. So when I saw that, I was like, EA, surely if they're making that much money on this, surely you're getting concessions to make sure that these low income parts of town are being served first, or you're getting symmetrical speeds, or an always on option, or affordability option, right? Like something. And the EDA just had no idea, right? Like didn't really know what 33% meant in its magnitude. So we often see dynamics like that where it's like communities just didn't know what questions to ask, or really what position of negotiating they could have been in. That's usually why we like to have slides like this. Path to an RFP, RFQ, Brian?
Yeah, so this gets back into a little bit of what I was saying before, like really understanding, starting out, like having those prior questions answered, and understanding what you want out of the RFP before you even start it. And that really gets down to, what does your community need for broadband accessibility, affordability, just having it in certain areas. There might be certain projects where a new part of the community is being renovated, let's say, and we need to get access to those. And so being able to narrow down exactly what the RFP is really important. Beforehand, if you need to, and I know we'll talk about this later as well too, but if you need to engage a consultant to help you determine those items, I would always highly suggest that, just to have support and almost like have your back in regards to getting this done the right way. And then once you've decided, okay, this is the path that we're going, this is the end result, now starting to put together the key terms and questions in the RFP. I think it's important when the process that you'll see typically is the RFP will go out. There'll be an opportunity for a call to go over the RFP, open it up for questions. I think that's really important as well too. So you can get some feedback even while the RFP process is going on, and you might have to send out addendums because of that. But if you do a lot of your work prior to this, you can really get specific into what you're asking for. And then once you're to that point, obviously making sure all of the stakeholders approvals, and this is, it could be your council, it could be your board. There's key businesses that are within your community that can be considered stakeholders in this that you want to kind of inform and ask questions about what's going on. Even gets back to those community anchor institutes that are going to be really important to the process as well too. And then once you go to issue, attracting and negotiating and selecting an ISP partner, that is in itself now a challenge from that perspective of it. Making sure you are getting the net very, very wide for ISPs. And there's a lot of resources out there that you can use where, for example, I get a lot of the RFPs actually just sent to me from other colleagues in the industry. But making sure they're on the right broadband, I guess, channels that people typically look at, all the way from I think Broadband Breakfast and Community Network. I think Chris Mitchell might have renamed his organization recently, but there's a lot of organizations out there that can just put the word out that your RFP is out on the street. And I think that's important to get as many responses as you can, because there's obviously local internet service providers, incumbent service providers that should have the opportunity to respond as well. But then there's also a lot of ISPs that are around the country that might be interested into coming into your market or coming into that state. And to be able to really compare as many responses as you can is a huge advantage to you. And then narrowing it down from that perspective, and selecting the right ISP partner off of that will be really important. But obviously, then it goes back to what was our end goal, and you're needing to select the right ISP partner based on what that end goal was from the start.
So I think Brian hit on a handful of these. I might call out a couple that just to elevate them. And Brian, if there's anything else that you'd want to call out. For me on the tips and tricks side, it's really know the potential economics, know your worth. There you can do if you can understand what economic value could be generated from that broadband network post deployment. Put yourself in the shoes of that internet operator. Try to find that financial model that I referenced earlier. If you know how the respondents might be looking at this opportunity, the information is critical in every negotiation, right? And so I think that's always for me, that's always the first step. I'm a little biased because I'm on the finance side. I think one of the things we found with that same deployment that I mentioned, we were originally expecting it to have like 1,200, 1,500 passings, something like that. And a couple years later, it went to 5,500 passings. Part of me very much was celebrating, right? Like that's awesome. That's exactly what, right? There's more ubiquitous connectivity now, or access to it. I think, and then deep down, the finance part was also like, ooh, we probably left a lot on the table. If an organization sees the economic potential to almost 5x the size of their deployment from what they said they could do before, that means they're making a healthy money, a decent chunk out of it. Anything you'd call out here, Brian, that we haven't talked about?
Um, we talked about using a template off the shelf. Conducting, I think we actually talked about a lot of these. I think the trusting but forgetting to validate is a big aspect of this too. References, following up on references. The broadband industry is a small world, even though it feels like it's a big world, especially if you're just diving in. Um, you're typically going to get either good recommendations or people that have worked with those providers before that are going to tell you how it went and how it didn't. And I will always say, um, if they're listed references in the RFP, they're probably going to give good references. That's the reason why the ISP put them in there. You would also want to ask the question if there's anybody else that they have worked with that you would want to talk to as well, to make sure you're not just only you want to hear every side to make sure you're choosing the right partner when the rubber meets the road at the end of the day. And then I know I touched on this as well too, but one of the landmines and pitfalls, staying only local. There are a lot of opportunities outside of your community, outside of the state, in regards to attracting the right people to help you with this. Whether it be a partner or even a consultant that can come in and help from that side as well too. Um,
That part hits on Kelty's question in the chat. What are your reflections for rural and frontier communities with smaller economies of scale? If you limit yourself only to those there or in the vicinity, then it makes the conversation a lot more challenging. I think what Snyder's talking about is you can bring other people in. There might be limitations and constraints, and of course, disadvantages to parts of that. But that's where we've seen communities that were quote unquote less attractive to local operators or nearby operators bring in somebody from a nearby state, and they were able to figure out and provide service. One of the things, Snyder, I think you've seen this. I've heard you talk about this before, but even a threat of an RFP. Did you want to dig in there more?
Yeah, so and just to build on that, so we've worked with, I say we, throughout different companies that I've worked with in the past. We've probably worked with over 100 municipalities. We're based in Birmingham, Alabama, so we were doing this in California, in Ohio, and Colorado. Um, Texas. There's been all kinds of different markets that we've done this. So sometimes it's just about choosing the right partner whenever you're evaluating this process. But we were actually working in a market where um, the local community and us as a team really saw that there wasn't much left to be completed in regards to connectivity for the incumbent that was there. And so what the municipality and us decided to do was we were just going to put out an RFP. And it really changed the existing provider's immediate response because um, prices went down. Those areas that weren't connected got connected. It accomplished the goals without even having to go through the whole RFP process. All they did was issue it with an understanding that they weren't actually going to even award anything. It's a different way to think outside the box of this and trying to get it done. We've seen examples of different companies across the country because a municipality puts out an RFP. There's a response from some of the local internet service providers, but that's part of thinking through all of this in a really unique way, and making sure you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. But I thought that was a very interesting approach. It's the only one we've done like that, and it was really successful. And in about, I'd say, 6 to 12 months, they had full broadband connectivity across their town.
One thing I might add on the trusting but forgetting to validate part is it's not just pre-RFP, it's also during construction, and also I would say afterwards, right? During the operations too. And so during construction, some of the nitty-gritty that we'll get into, particularly when we're underwriting a potential deal, is like looking at the bill of materials And so just saying somebody's in a private operator saying, yeah, we'll get fiber over there. That could mean a lot of different things. Is it one strand of fiber? Technically, that's fiber. But is it enough to serve that community? We've also seen instances where it's you have that line of fiber, but then the optical network equipment on both ends of that are antiquated because they were trying to save costs, and so that limits the potential for quote unquote fiber. Um, Through to the operations, right, where they might quote a high passing number, but if those passings are going through certain low income communities, but you're seeing little to no take rate, that should spur questions, right? Like, how much are you charging for drop costs, et cetera, et cetera. That does segue into our next slide. Examples of community protection. So just to start a little bit of like the juices flowing in the back of your brains of what we've seen and have advocated for ourselves in different instances of ways communities could protect their own connectivity interests, really in the name of digital sovereignty. One is community benefits agreements. And so in one instance, right, like we asked the internet provider to sign up for a CBA where they would transparently or quarterly provide quarterly reporting and data to a predetermined set of community stakeholders, electeds, unelecteds, the utilities board, the HBCU, a couple of the church groups, and some local nonprofits, community anchors, so that they could see when and where things are going. So there's transparent data there. Validating plans and equipment, timed permits, rights of way, easements. So requiring a refresh of those permits. Consumer community feedback, requiring that the internet provider do that, and or doing it on the community side, but then requiring certain actions or any mitigations to come depending on what that feedback is. An interesting one that we've looked at in a couple instances is a right of first refusal or a right of veto. And so if it's a private owned network and they're looking to exit that area, in the broader telecom space, we're seeing lots of consolidation, which basically means networks are being sold to other operators and often are getting rolled up into larger and larger networks. Right of first refusal, we had in one community where the community could, if the network operator wanted to sell it, and just for context, the like 80% of that network was funded by public grants. Then the community would have the option to buy the network from the operator, not at 100 cents on the dollar, but it'd be 20 cents because it'd be the minus the public grant part, right? Or a right of veto. And so the community would be able to say, oh, if you're selling it to this next owner, we want to have the right of veto just in case that new owner is not mission aligned. Deployment reporting mentioned, affordability we've mentioned, training support and free Wi-Fi locations. Part of our underwriting is a chunk that we call community engagement. And it's very fascinating to hear how some operators respond to this. Some will say, I've done my community engagement. I did a presentation at the town hall. On the other end of the spectrum, we'll hear operators say, well, I have a line in my operating expenses reserved to pay for a digital navigator at the local library and to fund local digital literacy, not because I want to grant it, but because I see that as improving my customer acquisition and reducing my customer churn. So it is in my economic benefit, my business benefit to do so. Training support and free Wi-Fi, I think would be an extension of that. Let me turn it over to Brian, where he'll talk through a few RFP examples that went well and how they thought about it.
Yeah, and after we send this out to everybody, there is a link for additional RFP examples. I'll kind of explain how even that sheet's laid out, so when you do get this, how it can be useful for you. I highlighted four examples that I'll talk through right now and get in a little bit more specifics. I think there were four different ones that were all still handled appropriately and were good, but I think showing the differences in the four is important for everyone to hear. And then I list typical contributions communities offered in these projects, but not only that, I also listed 13 additional RFPs that you can access publicly and gives a little bit of description about each one. And then uh, I have a section in here for best examples of in-kind contributions. We'll talk about that a little bit during this as well too. And the last section of it is a public-private partnership template language. It is not a template RFP. It is template language that you can use to start with because I want to add that each community is different. Everything that you're asking for is going to be different. So it's important that you can start with some of these items, but then you really need to build off of them. So, Pikeville, Kentucky. Uh, they were explicitly asking for private ISP partners to propose in-kind contributions, but they also included conduit and dark fiber assets. Um, I'm going to stop right there for a second. I think first, understanding the assets that you have already in place is really important in this process. And I know I mentioned before about having consultants get involved in this, but some of this you can even do internally, just having an understanding of what you have to offer from there could be utility providers that are willing to offer spare conduit. There could be community anchor institutes that are willing to offer space for different things. And understanding that before you get into the RFP process is really important because that benefits the ISP. The ISP wants to hear that because you're lowering their cost. And for Pikeville, for example, one of the actual comments in the RFP were respondents should consider in-kind contributions from the city, including conduit and dark fiber. I'm going to use an example of a city that I talked to that for 20 years they had a dark fiber, not a dark fiber, I'm sorry, a lit fiber service going to their city facilities, but it was a 288 size cable, and they had so much spare capacity for 20 years, they were not leasing that out and making revenue that they could then put back into the community or put back into different broadband initiatives. And that in itself is like a lesson learned from what we talked with that community about. Like that is a huge asset that you can leverage. And for Pikeville, for example, it's your classic city provides assets and then the ISP builds and operates. A middle mile network saves an ISP roughly 20 to 25% of their capital costs. Just that is a huge savings, especially when you're trying to go to some more rural areas or different areas that are tougher to reach. That's a huge asset from that aspect of it. Not everybody has that, but if you do, it's a way to really help the partnership get going and speed to market, saving money and also potentially sharing in some of the revenue. And then before, as I get into this, I also want to say I know there's a lot of states that restrict municipalities from being the service provider. Um, Providing dark fiber, providing spare conduit, you can do that anywhere. You're not the ISP, you're enabling your partner ISP. And I think that's really important from that side. It could be an ISP that you're already working with in the community that's an incumbent that you can help expand and grow. Or it's an ISP that's coming into town to help you fill the gaps and things like that. In South Portland, so The city offered multiple in-kind contributions for this project, access to the right-of-way or access to city fiber, right-of-way help, pole building attachment rights, public works support, and again, a quote from the RFP was access to existing fiber, assistance with right-of-way, attachment rights, in-kind work, and all of this is prior to the network build as well too. It shows that it's the soft cost reduction model, and it sets a great precedent for permitting plus attachment rights in the public works. So, speed to market and speed to that build for that ISP is a huge advantage from that side. Hidden Hills, California. So the city preferred no direct funding, encouraged a revenue share or an in-kind agreement. Um, and like basically a possible revenue sharing or in-kind agreement. City prefers not to contribute funds. There's a lot of uh, communities out there that do not have the funding to be able to put towards this. That's where we keep going back to the in-kind contributions sometimes are just as good as funding. And there's a way for you to figure out what is still the monetization of those in-kind contributions that you could potentially share in revenue from the ISP in helping with some of those in-kind items. I know we've mentioned some of the in-kind contributions already. I'll go through some more of those again here in a second. Um, South San Francisco, California. So they required the ISP to propose matching funds or in-kind contributions. This is more an example of an RFP that was a grant stacked public-private partnership. So the community was getting grant fundings, and this was kind of common in BEAD and ARPA funds. And then they're trying to find a partner that can do a local match either in cash or in-kind contributions. So another example of an RFP where it was through grants that kind of got things going, and then the ISP ultimately helped them finish everything off from that side. So those were some of the four that we wanted to highlight. Again, I've got 13 additional RFP examples in the document that you'll get in that link. Um, but some of the typical contributions that these specific communities offered, the four that are on the slide right now, so existing conduit and fiber, pole attachment rights, streamlined permitting, anchor tenant contracts, buildings, land for huts. So an internet service provider is going to be putting their electronics to service the residents and businesses somewhere. All communities typically have buildings or land that can be used and offered to either house these electronics, or land could be offered to for material storage, office space. There's a lot of different things that can be used. Again, that you might not be thinking of right now, but is really going to help support that ISP and help you work together more in a partnership than I'm just giving you the keys to my car, and like my 15-year-old just got his learner's permit and I'm terrified from that side. So it's like giving your keys to an ISP and saying, okay, I hope this works out. I don't think that's where everybody wants to be from that perspective. So going through this process is important. Um, Let me go through. So, some of the other in-kind contributions from those 13 RFPs that I was mentioning. So, in-kind staffing, um, matching infrastructure, grant support, I think was good. Quantified in-kind value. That's what I was just kind of referencing. So, how do you quantify the in-kind contributions that you're giving? And I think that will be part of either an upfront analysis from your consultant or even working with the maybe the final three that you select that you're actually doing final interviews with as well too, to make sure that both of you are on the right page in regards to that value, because that right there could be a deal breaker in how things move forward. And you want to make sure that both you and your partner are on the right page there. Um, Area in New York, they gave advocacy access help, marketing support, like Brian said. We did a market in Ohio where we started out in a small village. It was about 1,300 homes, and obviously a very tight-knit community. and that community, they would respond better if there was like a note from the mayor. And so it was literally a message from the mayor, but within that would be the marketing materials for signing up for services and things like that as well too. Um, so I think that's really important too. GIS information, poll information, all of those are really grateful from that. Um, and then I'll kind of end it on this, but uh, vertical assets are also valuable as well too. So if the community owns the street poles or anything like that as well, those could be used for Wi-Fi antennas, different uses for the ISP. So again, we're just keep naming assets that the community might own that can really benefit that ISP. So I will stop rambling now, that we're getting to kind of the top of the hour, and I think we could start opening it up for some questions and answers here. But I know that was a lot to cover. You will be getting this document again too that goes into more detail, so you can spend a little bit more time on it, and then we can even answer questions after after this if things come up as you read that.
One of the reflections I might just add before, as folks are thinking about questions they might want to either say or type into the chat, it's almost like, Brian, it'd be helpful to almost see like the income statement of an internet operator, right? And also the capital expenditure costs. Like, what is it that the internet operator is buying or paying for? And if you see a line item where it's like office space, oh shit, well, we could help with that. Or like on the revenue side, customer acquisition, right? Like community could play a huge role providing boots on the ground, drumming up take rate support.
Yeah, and then Kelty asked a good question about where should a small rural community turn for GIS information. Uh, there are GIS companies out there that can help you pull that information. Again, we'd be happy to send you a list of some of those companies that can help you pull that. In certain situations, though, you actually have to go collect some of that data and then put it into a GIS format. You might not have the capabilities of funds to do that like early on before the RFP process comes out, but that could actually be part of your RFP is to get that data as you're going through the whole process of planning and things like that, working with a consultant early on, because I do think having accurate data ahead of time will make you that more educated and I guess prepared for everything that you're going to list out and be accurate from that respect too.
This is where ideally that data exists digitally, whether it is with the GIS service person or the town records. Sometimes it's we've seen it in paper form from like the 90s, and there's coffee stains here and there. We're actually in the middle of looking at an investment in New Mexico right now, where the internet operator was randomly walking down the street that they were going to try to trench fiber down, and they saw a couple of handholds. They opened it up, and there was fiber there. It took like a couple weeks. It didn't show up on any map. It took a couple weeks to figure out who owned it, and it ended up being the prior ownership record had expired or something like that. And then so it was this was on tribal land, so the tribe ended up owning it. And they were the sponsors who were trying to get connectivity to their local communities. That was a huge savings to the project, just randomly running into it. And so, asset mapping can sound, you never know what you might find, particularly for, I would say, some of the towns that may be less efficient or effective with record keeping.
Do we want to pull down slides and see if people have questions or things they want to talk through? Thank you all for that really informative presentation. So those of you who are still here, I'll just reiterate that the next 30 minutes are open for questions, or if there are things that you all want to work through. We realize that we have a great resource in the experience of the Bryans and Connect Humanity. So feel free to unmute yourself or come on screen if you have something that you want to talk through. And if you do not, then we can go ahead and wrap. And Peggy, thanks for that reminder that councils of governments have GIS services. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We will follow up with a copy of the slides and the recording, and we appreciate everybody's time and participation.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, y'all.